Well, thank you very much to both Harinder and Tuan for setting this up, and thank you for having me to speak today. I'm excited to, again, hopefully provide some helpful information about transitioning from a PhD in life sciences in graduate school to the world of strategy consulting, and then talk about what it's like to work in strategy consulting day to day, and then actually how to transition out of consulting and what your options look like after a career in consulting. I will preface by saying I am a recovering consultant. I left Guidehouse just earlier this year to start working at Tempus, where I'm now employed as a research strategy lead within our research and development division. Just to outline the presentation, I'll start by talking a little bit about the transition from grad school to consulting, talk about career exploration, talk about some steps for preparation and learning that are kind of essential to prepare yourself for to going through the consulting interview process, and then talk about how to land an interview, what the interview process looks like, how to hopefully receive an offer if you decide that consulting is a career track that you're interested in. Then we'll spend some time talking about, I'm calling it day in the life, but it's essentially we'll go through a brief consulting industry overview, and then we'll talk about what a day in the life sort of looks like. Again, it's a very broad definition, but from my particular viewpoint, what's a typical project or team structure? What are some of the roles and responsibilities? And then finally, at the end, I'd like to talk about just briefly about life after consulting. So what are my options after a career in consulting? What are the things that individuals with consulting backgrounds will typically go on to do, particularly within the life sciences industry? And then we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A. I will say, while we'll have dedicated time for Q&A at the end, please feel free to ask questions throughout. Interrupt me whenever you want. Harinder, Tuan, I'm not sure if this is, the setup is open forum for questions, or if you will receive questions from the audience that you can parlay to me, or what's the ideal setup for that?
Yeah, what we'll do is that we'll keep track of the Q&A, so people add your questions in Q&A chat, and if we feel it's relevant to what you're presenting, we'll quickly, if you're okay, we'll interrupt you to ask that question. If not, we can leave them all in the end. We can have a nice Q&A in the end.
Please, yeah, certainly interrupt if it's relevant to the current topic, and happy to cover. I want this to be as useful as possible to everyone on the line. So,
yeah, thanks.
Great. So actually, before I jump into career exploration, I realized that I did not provide an about me slide. Tuan gave a really nice overview, but just for a little bit more context on my background, as he said, completed my PhD at the University of Chicago, moved to strategy consulting, specifically within life sciences at Navigant Consulting. I worked there for about 3 years. As we went through, toward the end of my tenure, we went through a transition where we were acquired by Guidehouse Consulting. And then just recently, as I mentioned, this past April, transitioned out of that consulting role and am now working in a research strategy role at Tempus Labs, also based here in Chicago. So just for that context, I want everyone to be on the same page about, I'm not currently working in consulting, but certainly have the experience that I'd like to speak to you about today. The first stage, sort of the first step, in my journey and in any journey in thinking about, a postgraduate career, is exploring all of the potential options that you have available to you. I know from conversations with Harinder that there are certainly resources at UC Irvine, just the way that there were dedicated resources at the University of Chicago for career exploration. And these are, clearly career exploration is not a part of our day-to-day coursework or thesis research or laboratory work, and typically something that you need to take a proactive role in seeking out while you're in the midst of your PhD studies. That being said, there are excellent resources to to point you in, any number of different directions for careers that are an option after you finish your PhD. As part of the career exploration process, one thing that I think is typically recommended, and something that I will certainly recommend, is to really just do as much networking as is possible, realizing, of course, that this, it's typically a somewhat time-consuming process and not always the most comfortable situation, but without reaching out to your alumni network, without reaching out to contacts on LinkedIn or through other warm introductions via email for individuals in the fields that you're interested in potentially pursuing, it's very difficult to get a holistic sense of what actually working in that career looks like. I mean, I think you could probably go through the list of potential career options and check the boxes on various elements of those careers that that do or do not fit your skill set, and you may be able to easily eliminate some of them right off the bat. But for others, it's going to be a difficult choice, and you want to make the most informed decision possible when you are starting to pursue specific career tracks with any vigor, because there is, it does take a lot of time to build up a contact list in a particular field or industry, and begin to pursue and apply for jobs within that industry. A question that I'd asked myself, I'd heard about consulting, about management consulting, strategy consulting as a potential career, and in asking yourself, is this the right career track for me? Is this something I'll really be interested in? Some of the things that you certainly want to consider and think about are, how can I best leverage my sort of non-research skill set as well as my research skill set to make an impact in the broader industry. Consulting, as we know, is very, very much a team-based exercise, and very much a commercial exercise. I think there are certain individuals who they don't necessarily want to be working on the commercial elements of life sciences. There are other individuals for whom that's really attractive. So I think that, first and foremost, is something that you want to consider and you want to be asking yourself. And then secondarily, another thing I always like to say and point out is that consulting it's very much a client service industry. While you have a lot of independence in the way that you work, and the decisions that you'll make internally for your team at whatever consulting firm you happen to be at the end of the day, it is still a client service industry. So you're often spending a lot of your time interfacing with clients. You're at the mercy of client timelines and of client expectations, and that just is sort of a different, very much a transition from certainly an academic world, but even a lot of other jobs within the commercial realm. So something you want to ask yourself is, are you okay with a position where there's frequent communication with clients who may have needs that aren't necessarily aligned with your own? And, will I thrive in a client service type role? So just a couple of the things that, I've learned throughout my journey that I wanted to pass along. And, as you consider this and all of the other potential questions for, whether or not consulting is the right career for you, certainly something you need to be considering and asking yourself. When we're talking about, preparing for job interviews and thinking about going into, actually entering into the consulting arena, entering into the interview process, a question I get a lot is, how do you successfully prepare for those interviews, particularly as a full-time graduate student? The first thing I would say, and I understand that this is unique for everyone, is you certainly want to discuss time expectations with your advisor when necessary. Just again, emphasizing that this is a long process. There's a significant amount of preparation and research that needs to go into not only choosing a career track, but choosing the firms to which you want to apply, gathering information on those firms, and preparing for the interview process. And even if this is something that is difficult in terms of discussing time expectations with your individual advisor, I just want everyone to understand that the preparation is non-trivial. It does take a very long time, so starting as early as possible is always recommended. Great. And then I want to talk a little bit about experiential learning and preparation for a career in consulting prior to the actual interview process. And I guess what I maybe refer to this as is elements for skill building and resume building that you want to be thinking about and trying to gather, well in advance of the time at which you're interviewing for consulting positions. And so the best way to gain this experience, and probably the number one thing that consulting firms will look for when they're reviewing your resume, is any engagement in formal experiences in your immediate field of interest. In this case, anything that can be translated to directly or indirectly to consulting, business operations, commercial assessment type work that you might have the opportunity to do as a supplement to your graduate studies. Beyond formal experiences, or even, within the realm of formal experiences, participating in things like internships, volunteer opportunities, anything that allow you to really gain some of those soft skills that are necessary for consulting that might be difficult to acquire within the laboratory setting or just within the course of your day-to-day graduate work are crucially important. And I'm saying this as someone who's reviewed, hundreds, we'll say, but certainly in the realm of hundreds of individual resumes and applications for consulting positions. This is the first thing that we're looking for. We're looking for relevant experience in consulting or business operations. Even in the realm of life sciences specific work, we're typically not spending a lot of time looking directly at your publication record or the specifics of your thesis work, for example. Those are, for life sciences consulting, I'll say those are sort of minimal necessary bars that you need to pass. But what's really going to differentiate you is, participation in these other experiences that show you understand what it's like to work in, the commercial realm of life sciences. And I think importantly, to my last point here, can really talk the talk. And we'll get into this a little bit when it comes to the interview, but one of the biggest things to consider is, day to day of whatever it might be in a non-academic role, whether it's consulting, whether it's investment banking, whether it's another type of commercial entity. Individuals in these fields just have a very different way of discussing the issues of the day. So I'm calling it talking the talk, but just reading up on major themes, current trends within the industry, pain points for individual firms, or just within the broader industry, and learning about how professionals in the field are talking about these particular issues. Because you may have a very different view of a particular issue, let's say even a scientific issue that's relevant to your thesis work, based on your academic experience, and just understanding the, as I said, trends, pain points, other elements that folks that actually work in the industry are talking about, is crucially important. So my example here, just an example, you may work in an oncology research lab and be studying mechanisms of immune evasion for a certain tumor type, and you may know a lot about the underlying science of that particular mechanism and that particular tumor type, but do you understand the considerations that are floating around in the field for reimbursement of immunotherapy drugs in patients when they're prescribed for off-label indications? I'm not saying this is a particular example of something you need to know right here, but it's an example of, a tangential consideration that's very specific to the commercial realm of biotech. That's probably something that's you would not consider at all in the day-to-day of your, laboratory research. So great. Before I talk about the consulting interview process a little bit, I'll just pause for a minute and see if there are any questions on the first portion here.
This one question from Jed Crude, which I tried to answer myself by looking on some of the stuff online, which is a really good question. What publications would you recommend to read to catch up on trends, pain points, and topics in consulting? Really good question. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. And these are oftentimes in the form of newsletters or daily updates that can be quite beneficial. There's a few. I can't remember how many of these are paid and how many of them are free resources. Through my current company, Tempus, we have access to all sorts of newsletters that I think Tempus as a corporate entity subscribes to, but Fierce Pharma is the first one that comes to mind, and they have a number of sub updates, sub publications, and newsletters that they publish. Endpoints News is another really good one. And then Genome Web publishes, again, a number of different newsletters on topics ranging from medical devices to precision medicine to oncology to different therapeutic areas. And those are, just getting that sent to your email on a daily basis, and even taking, a minute to look through the headlines, to understand what the issues are, to understand what the new deals of the day are, can be really helpful and can start to get you versed in the language that's used in the commercial world.
So I have one more resource, if I can say that, Andrew. There's a LinkedIn group on PhD to consulting. I would highly recommend you to become part of it. It's a close and smaller, well, it's a very big group, but it's closed, so you have to get an approval. So I would say, polish your LinkedIn profile, ask them to connect or allow you access, and then that's where you're going to get a lot of information related to consulting, especially for PhDs. And there's also Consulting Magazine. I'm adding the link into the chat. Look into that. There are a lot of new information related to consulting you'll get, and also the different consulting companies. Thank you. Go ahead, Andrew. We'll take more questions later.
Yeah, no, Harinder, that's a great resource as well. Thank you for bringing that up. Perfect. So I want to talk about the interview process a little bit, and I will caveat, should have added an asterisk to the slide, but I'll caveat that this is specific, I'm omitting some details, but fairly specific to my particular firm. So a specialized global healthcare consultancy. But the process is going to look somewhat similar regardless of the consulting firm that you're applying to. The first stage, as always, is to fill out the application for the job. And typically you'll upload both your resume and your cover letter. I won't go into a lot of detail on specifics about how to format the resume or format the cover letter, but just know that these are both typically one-page documents. The resume for a consulting firm, the resume is, they almost always want a concise one-page business resume, not a 3 or 4 page CV. Again, because some of that information, specific classes that you TA'd, various talks, publications, etc. Those are the types of details that aren't necessarily as front of mind for those that are reviewing the application. The cover letter occasionally is optional. If it's offered as an option as part of the application, you certainly want to submit a cover letter. Again, typically a very short document, only a paragraph or two, and this is just your opportunity to sell your unique experience and your unique, I use a buzzword, your unique brand to the consulting firm outside of individual line items that you might include on a resume. After the initial resume and cover letter screen, there is typically what we call a phone screen or a phone case. This is an initial time to touch base with a larger pool of applicants who have, passed the first stage of resume review, just to get a sense of how they communicate, how they interact on the phone, and potentially to provide a short phone case. The case would be a, somewhat like a typical business case, although typically much shorter, typically much more focused, something that can be conducted remotely or over the phone with ease. These are typically, at least at my firm, these are typically about half-hour conversations, typically with a consultant on the specific team for which you were seeking to be hired by. And then after that screen, the final stage, and I know some firms operate a little differently. Some firms will have multiple days of in-person interviews, or they may have 2 rounds of in-person interviews. My firm, we typically only did 1 day. It was about 3 to 4 hours total. You'd meet with 4 or 5 different folks on the team. And these interviews would consist of both behavioral interviews, so descriptions of your background and experience, and information gathering on how you might react to certain types of situations in a very qualitative manner, and then case interviews. So specifically typical quantitative case interviews, and sometimes more qualitative, but always business type case interviews. And these are typically anywhere typically anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes per individual case. And depending on the type of firm you're applying to, you may get more specialized or more generalized types of case interview questions. And I say that as an example because at my firm, or my team, I should say, which was life sciences specifically, so pharma and biotech industry focused within our healthcare consulting group, all of our qualitative and quantitative case interviews were focused on the pharma and biotech industry, because we were really looking to pressure test industry knowledge of the individuals that were applying. We didn't ask a lot of, how many golf balls fit in the Empire State Building type questions, nor other business questions about, consumer packaged goods, other industries, or things like that. But you may run into those types of interviews at more generalist type firms. And so I just wanted to give an example of a case study, and I came up with this off the top of my head, but it's not atypical for, a case interview type question that we would ask, at least at my firm, which is, you have a client who's a large pharma company, and they're considering an acquisition of a different biotech company. This small biotech company only has 1 asset in their pipeline. The product is currently in phase 3 trials for ulcerative colitis, and the small biotech is negotiating for a $2 billion acquisition price. Our client, in this case, wants to know how long it will take them to break even on this investment, and how would you advise your client to proceed? So, good example of a classic quantitative question, not a lot of information given up front. Fairly open-ended in terms of information, but with one particular focus question from the client in mind, and then we leave it really open-ended for individuals to take it in whatever direction they see fit. Any questions on sort of case studies, on the overall interview process? Anything I can answer about sort of process for interviewing itself at this point, because after this I will jump into sort of an overview of the industry and then a day-to-day walkthrough.
So I don't see any questions right now, but if you have questions, feel free to add in Q&A chat box, or if you would like to just speak by yourself, just let me know. I'll unmute you and make you a panelist so you can ask the question directly. We do have a question. Will you have to provide a written report for the case study?
A written report?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, occasionally, yeah. And so actually that reminds me, there was a format that we started to use in my last year at my firm, and I think is actually becoming more typical of some of the other firms as well. And we called it a take-home case study, and actually involved the preparation of a 10 to 15 slide presentation with some background research. So we would ask a prompt, not dissimilar to the one on the current slide, but typically with a lot more background information, and ask candidates to answer a detailed set of questions, and actually provide a 30-minute presentation walkthrough to a team of consultants where it's actually a little bit of a grilling process. Think of it not dissimilar to a thesis defense or something like that, where you're asked to answer the questions, prepare the background research to support your conclusions, and then folks will try to pressure test those as you present. So that's another commonly used type of case study.
Great. We have another question from Alex Fass. How would you approach this case study example, the one you have on the screen? How much time do you have to look up some numbers you don't know off the top of your head?
Yeah. So you'd have, typically we would run these cases, you'd have just a piece of paper and a pen. You wouldn't be expected to look up numbers or have, the prior knowledge that you need to have is just some operating knowledge about how the industry works, like how the drug approval process might work in this case, and then what types of questions you need to ask to get the data that you need to answer the question. And so basically the specific question in this case is how long it would take to break even on a $2 billion investment. So what we're asking you is to consider, both revenue and cost over, the development process, and, provide an estimate for when $2 billion may be able to be recovered. And as part of that, you'll need to ask questions about, for example, the market size for ulcerative colitis, what you would expect market share to look like at peak. So how much of the total ulcerative colitis will we be able to, ulcerative colitis market will be able to capture if this product is approved. That would be another consideration in this case that we'd be looking for candidates to answer. So they would say, the product's currently in phase 3 clinical trials. This means there's a chance that it does not receive formal FDA approval. Therefore, will never enter the market, and that's a pretty big risk. And in that case, your revenue opportunity is zero. And if they only have one asset, you would never recover your $2 billion. But you'd want to ask questions like that. You'd want to understand what the time scale looks like. You'd want to understand what the investment and cost structure looks like. And then you'd be asked to walk through your math and, basically show us how, given the investments needed to be made and given the expected revenue opportunity, how many years basically would it take until $2 billion plus all additional costs could be recovered. So very open-ended. All of those numbers are things that the interviewer will have on their prompt and will be prompted to provide you once you ask the right questions. So it really is just about keeping an open line of communication and making sure that you're asking the right questions when appropriate. And if you get stuck, not being afraid to sort of ask for clarification, ask for help, and keep things moving, because we are always looking for candidates to do this independently.
Great, thank you. Andrew, we have one quick question. I mean, feel free to keep it for later, but I just wanted to ask because this has come up many times and there's one of the questions there. So scientists, PhD students, postdocs are not quite trained into business jargon. There's a lot of business management kind of information or training you need as you're addressing this case study. What are the different avenues by which students, postdocs can prepare themselves for careers in consulting, especially getting that knowledge, like when you go and sit through, going through this study? Because I mean, let's be very honest, academia doesn't provide that knowledge, that kind of training, other than the technical academic knowledge. If you want to take this, answer this later on, feel free, but whatever you want to answer,
No, it's a great question. And so, every individual experience is going to be different, but something that I would highly recommend, because it was a resource that I was able to leverage. I don't know if there is off the top of my head, if Irvine has a graduate business school, but that's a great resource, whatever it might be, like events that they put on, clubs that they have, ability to participate in classes, even in an auditing capacity. It's an invaluable resource. It's excellent. And that's something that an experience I was able to participate in at Chicago was actually taking what was called a laboratory class through the Booth School of Business at Chicago that involved basically a a half-scale consulting project for a real pharmaceutical client, along with an interdisciplinary team of scientists and MBA students. And that helps diverse you in, an experience like that helped diverse me in the language of commercialization of life sciences, helped introduce me to all the various considerations that may be more typical of a business student, of an MBA student, in terms of how they think about approaching a problem or approaching the world, not always following a laboratory type approach, but still following a scientific type method of forming a hypothesis, asking the right questions, gathering your data and information, and presenting results in a way that are digestible to a more commercial audience. So that would be sort of, if that resource is available, that would be my sort of top recommendation. If those resources are hard to come by, or it's difficult to enroll in those classes or take part in those events, then you'd really just need to find somebody. You need to find a mentor or a contact, either somebody that has that experience from the business side or has worked in the industry, who you could, frequently connect with to, to try to verse yourself in that type of conversation and language.
Awesome, thank you. Just want to point out to UCI folks who are joining us. Our program also offers Business Concept for STEM Scientists course, which is a mini course offered twice a year. Other than that, UCI Beal Applied Innovation also has a lot of resources you can tap into. There is a business school also. They do have some aspects for scientists. Otherwise, if this doesn't work for you, if you're not from UCI, I know UCSD, UCLA nearby, or Coursera also has a lot of courses on business and entrepreneurship, or like management concept for STEM scientists. You might have to pay for a little bit. Sometimes it's worth it. So sorry, Andrew, go ahead.
Yeah.
I won't stop anymore.
No, of course. Great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of what a typical day might look like, what a consulting structure will look like, project and team structure. But first, I guess I'll just give a really brief industry overview. I'm sure many of you have seen similar slides to this one. And there are so many different ways you could break down the industry. The way I was thinking about it when I was applying for firms out of Chicago was, you've got the big three global management consulting firms, McKinsey, BCG, and Bain. You have the big four accounting firms that typically offer specialized consulting arms as part of their offerings. And sometimes these teams actually even have different names. I know at EY, Parthenon is their like specific life sciences consulting arm. So just make sure that you're sort of applying to the right, the right arm of a company, especially when it's one of these larger entities. And then there's more specialized firms, and I just highlighted some that are well known in the life sciences industry, and firms for which I did sufficient research and made applications to. So LEK, Huron, Guidehouse, which again formerly Navigant, and ZS are just a couple of examples of more specialized firms that still have very large global presence and operate across a number of industries, but are typically more have a strong focus in healthcare or life sciences. Great. And then talking about sort of a day in the life and talking about these different elements, I again want to add the asterisks because I want to caveat that this is specific to a life sciences healthcare focused consultancy for some of the elements that I'm going to be talking about. The first thing to think about when you're thinking about what you're going to work on as a consultant are, which clients are you going to be working for? Which types of projects are you going to be working on? And when I think about our client base, think about the overall client base of a particular firm or team, you basically are sourcing clients and projects from three different broad buckets. You have a lot of legacy clients, or add-on projects, I'll call them. So clients with which the partners or directors at your firm, or even your team in particular, have worked with on strategy or consulting engagements in the past. and they're looking to, they thought that the firm did a good job. They liked the work that the team provided, and they're looking for a follow-up or an add-on to an existing project. Then you have brand new clients that may be sourced from a number of different places. Sometimes it's cold outreach. A lot of times clients will put out RFPs, requests for proposals, that consulting firms will prepare in order to highlight their skill set and their experience within a particular project type or therapeutic area. And then you have existing relationships. I sort of broke this up separately. These are, former employees of your firm, current partners or directors of your firm that have existing relationships with individuals and maybe not specific companies or teams, but are able to, source these various projects from individuals for whom they've worked for or with in the past, just based on personal relationships. So the next stage, thinking about all the potential ways in which you might source the work. The next stage is to, actually sell the work. This is something that's more, typically more responsibility of the partners and directors, not necessarily of an entry-level consultant or a PhD or MBA level consultant, but something that's important to be aware of, both in advance of applying to a job and while you're sort of thinking about the types of projects you're going to work on at a firm. The way I would always think about it at Navigant was, when I was thinking about the types of projects we would sell, is thinking about our therapeutic areas of expertise. That is, a strength in oncology or ophthalmology or, rare disease types. And then functional areas of expertise. So expertise in things like new product planning, in disease area like broader disease area strategies, in billing and reimbursement for new product launches in the US. And so you can kind of create a matrix of all the different firms that are on, your consultancy's client list, all of the different areas of sort of therapeutic areas of expertise within your industry, and then all of the different functional areas. And typically, an individual project will fall at the intersection within that matrix. Once a project is sold, say we have a new client, we're selling a new product launch strategy engagement for an immunology asset that they have. You then need to think about resourcing for that particular project. And two big components that go into this are team composition and then, tracking of time and resources. So what does a team typically look like, and how long is that engagement going to run for? Again, quite variable from project to project, but I can give some just benchmarks from my time in consulting. The most typical project, the team composition would probably be a partner, the highest level of the consulting rung, a partner who owns the relationship with the client and formally sold the work, then either a director or associate director who sort of do more of the day-to-day sort of, not management of the project elements, but more of the day-to-day hand-holding with particular clients. And then you have folks within the sort of true, call them the workhorse realm, managing consultants. Sometimes they're called project managers, and then entry-level consultants and analysts. And those are the individuals that are typically executing the work. And that will range anywhere from typically, I guess I'll say 1 to 3 managing consultants or project managers, and then typically 2 to 4 individual consultants or analysts that are helping to support various workflows and various elements of an individual project. I wanted to talk a little bit about interfacing with the client team. This can be a big draw of consulting for a lot of people, is the opportunity to have that face-to-face time with client teams. And this is typically something that is more of a focus of individuals at the managing consultant level, of the project manager level, but certainly numerous opportunities at the entry level consultant or analyst level to also interface with clients directly and be responsible for that communication. And part of that communication, actually a lot of that communication, is regarding tracking of project progress. And so a lot of the sort of day-to-day communication role ends up looking more similar to a what you might call like a product or project manager role. Somebody who's keeping track of all of the individual work streams, all of the different components that are going to be part of a final deliverable or interim deliverable for a particular project, and providing updates to the client as they request them or as they are needed, to gather or solicit input back from the client with regard to project progress. So. Great. Wanted to talk about two different project examples, just exemplary projects that I was able to take part in during my time at Navigant, working for a few different clients, but wanted to highlight just a few examples here. The first example was a very large, we'll call landscape assessment and product journey for, again, this is a large international pharma client that was launching a new therapeutic radiopharmaceutical project. This particular engagement was very interesting because it was a brand new therapeutic area for the client. So even though they were a large client with billions of dollars in revenue and multiple products on the market, in other areas, this is their first radiopharmaceutical product. And so they were very, they did not have a lot of internal knowledge of the way in which you need to go about, commercializing something with the restrictions and regulatory burden that is placed on a radiopharmaceutical product. So this particular project was very, it was very open. We could be very open-ended in our approach, and we were able to work very independently. The expectations from the client were quite clear. They wanted an end-to-end product journey, tracking, every person, individual entity within the healthcare industry that would touch their product or be part of getting the product to the patient. And they let us run independently with the rest of the work. So most of the other scoping, the way in which we conducted the research, the way in which we presented our findings was fairly open-ended compared to other projects that I've worked on. And we also worked remotely for this project. So this was a client that was located overseas, and the entire project team was based here in the US. And we, all of the work for this particular project happened in a remote fashion in our office. I wanted to contrast that to another large project that I worked on, which was a new US product launch that involved a lot of commercial planning for a novel oncology asset for a large client based here in the US. And while this particular project had a narrow product focus, we were only focused on one particular pharmaceutical for one particular indication, there was a very broad functional scope. That is, we interacted with individuals and teams that spanned the entire sort of commercial organization at this particular client. So everything from competitive intelligence to billing and reimbursement to clinical research strategy to health economics and outcomes research, sort of putting together all the different pieces of the puzzle from the commercial realm and helping them think about strategically how they were going to, have a successful launch for this product after the approval following a phase 3 clinical trial. And I highlight this project too because it just operated very differently than the example that I gave for project 1. There was really close interaction with the client team. We essentially worked on site directly with the client and their various commercial teams every single day. And it proved to be a fairly difficult role for both coordinating with the client and all of their various stakeholders, and in setting expectations for the involvement that we can have as an external consultancy in advising a very large set of internal teams with their own set of independent directives for what they're supposed to be working on and what they're supposed to do as part of launching this particular product. So wanted to highlight those two projects because they were, while both were quite interesting and both were longer term engagements, they were very different in terms of expectations and how they operated on a day-to-day basis. So great. Before I talk a little bit about sort of life after consulting, I know we're getting close to the end. You know what, maybe I'll just run through this slide quickly and then we can get right into Q&A. So in the interest of time, this is my only slide here. And this is just to say that, a lot of people look in consulting as while many people are in consulting for their entirety of their careers, a lot of people look at consulting as a springboard to other potential career options. And there are a lot of doors that are opened by, being a consultant. You have the opportunity to work with, large clients. You have the opportunity to work with individuals and teams across, a number of different commercial entities within your industry. And that helps you both to understand what the different types of functional roles are and what are the sort of individual roles or decisions that you most want to be a part of. And then also to make personal connections with clients, with individual teams, and with new companies. And I'll just say as an example that, in my first 2 years in consulting, there were, I think, probably five individuals on my specific team within the office in Chicago that received and accepted offers for positions with client teams that they had worked for directly. And so that just exemplifies the different jumping off points that you can go to after a career in consulting. A lot of individuals, and this is again specific to life sciences consulting, a lot of individuals will go to pharma or biotech companies, large pharma companies like Novartis, AbbVie, data companies like Flatiron. Individuals also will typically move to startups or even to something in the financial realm. So I moved to my current position in research strategy at Tempus, which is, we call ourselves a little bit more than a startup, but was sort of in the startup realm when I was considering the job and going through the application process. People have moved on to financial entities, investment banking, and equity research at places like William Blair. And then there are other entities, venture funds, even focused in venture funds that folks have gone on to. And then of course there's the public sector. So plenty of jobs in an advisory capacity or in a regulatory capacity for federal entities like the NIH or FDA. Great. And that was all I had for specific content. We can jump back to Q&A. I know we only have a couple minutes left, but happy to stay on for 5 minutes, slightly longer, and answer any questions that might be out there.
I just wanted to say thank you, Andrew, for sharing your experience and putting together these slides today. I do have a few questions that have come into me for the Q&A. First off, the session will be recorded and I think distributed through GPS STEM. And any notes, I'm taking notes and we'll be sending some information out on an email to the listserv. But one of the first questions we have is, did you ever feel that an MBA would have helped progress your career? Or did you feel like the PhD gave you a different skill set apart from the MBA candidates that allowed you to succeed?
Yeah, it depends. It really depends on what industry you're looking to work in. For life sciences and healthcare consulting, has never felt like an MBA would be a necessary qualification. A lot of people will say this, just going through consulting, spending a couple of years in consulting kind of acts as on-the-job training and forces you to learn all of the sort of business concepts and ways of interacting in that world that you might pick up from an MBA. You know, that's not to say that I know plenty of individuals with dual PhD MBAs who, you know, really have really opened a lot of doors for themselves and have a lot of options. But I guess the short answer is for life sciences consulting or healthcare consulting specifically, I had never felt like an MBA would have given me more of a leg up or have been that advantageous.
3 more questions. The first one you don't really have to answer. Could you talk a little bit about your salary if you're comfortable? And were you able to negotiate in your starting position?
Yeah, I won't talk about the salary number specifically. There's plenty of resources online that I think are great for gathering that type of number. Glassdoor, you usually just have to put some information in, but typically you can get a pretty nice range on salary. When it comes to negotiation, there's always room to negotiate. I tried to negotiate my initial consulting offer. I didn't really have a whole lot of leverage. You have to realize what you bring to the table and what differentiates you from everyone else that's applying. But typically for an entry level consultant, the offers in terms of salary and benefits are fairly standard. But that's not to say there's not room for negotiation. And I will say that when I transitioned out of consulting to my new position, I went through a pretty long negotiation process for salary with my new position because, you have a lot more, it was more individualized. I had a lot more leverage. You just need to kind of ask yourself those questions and then have an awareness of how your offer compares to everybody else that might be an entry-level consultant for that position.
The next question is, how is your work-life balance in consulting?
Yeah, it's tough at times. It's no secret. It's a very demanding job. It was never untenable. That was not the reason why I left consulting. I think you hear horror stories of people leaving consulting because they can't handle the workload. And I don't doubt that can certainly happen. I won't sugarcoat it and say that it was easy. It was very tough. It was a pretty difficult transition from, laboratory research and a PhD. But what's great is that you're always working in a relatively structured internal team setting. And you should have individuals that are, a lot of individuals that are sort of fighting the same fight that you're fighting and vouching for your time and effort. And then hopefully trying to negotiate expectations with the clients in an efficient manner. There are times when the work-life balance gets fairly difficult when there's big deadlines and a limited amount of time, and perhaps a project wasn't, properly scoped. But that is, from my experience, I'd say more the exception than the rule.
We're at the top of the hour, but there are just 2 more questions if you have the time.
Yeah, I can stay on for a couple minutes.
I guess I'll rephrase this one. When in your PhD career did you start to prepare for joining a consultancy? How much lead up time, I guess?
Yeah. So I finished my PhD in 5 academic years. I started to do the initial exploration process and sort of research, put some feelers out at the start of my 3rd year, after I'd finished my thesis proposal and requisite coursework and things like that, and then really started to get in probably 2 years in advance. I'd say in between my 3rd and 4th academic year, really started to seek out additional experiences and additional ways to connect with people in the industry, and to start doing things like taking classes through the business school, working with the University of Chicago Tech Transfer Department, doing product evaluation, again on an intern type capacity, and then just seeking out other individuals for application and case preparation.
And this last question, which I think is perfect to end on. can you talk a little bit more about what you're doing now and how has it benefited from your consulting experience? What about your new role really exemplifies what you picked up in consulting?
Yeah, absolutely. So my current role, and actually this is not reflected on my my LinkedIn or on the front page. I started as a scientific product manager at Tempus, and have since transitioned to a lead role on our research strategy team, which is a relatively new team. But essentially what we're doing is, what I'm working on is portfolio management for all of the different assays, algorithms, and individual tests that we either currently offer as part of our commercial offering or are in development in our internal pipeline. And I'd say everything I learned from consulting has proven valuable in this role, from time management to expectation setting, project management, just managing individual expectations and individual work streams, broad knowledge of the industry, particularly within focused therapeutic areas like oncology, has been invaluable, and really gives you a leg up on, would give you a massive leg up on individuals who, don't have that experience coming in and maybe only have what I'd call more technical prior experience.
So Tuan, if you wouldn't mind, if I can take one last question, and Andrew, do you have a minute?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so we have a question from Jenna, which is very relevant, which is, what about travel as a consultant? I've been told that it can be a lot of travel depending on the position. And to tie that with another question from Gertrude, what kind of soft skills that are desirable for people who get into consulting jobs?
Yeah, I can answer both of those. Travel is extremely firm and project dependent. Navigant, for example, within our life sciences division, tried to operate on a fairly low travel model. I traveled a lot locally within the Midwest and within Chicago, but I only traveled, cross country, I would say a handful of times in 3 years. That is, I'd say, more typical of firms in the same realm as Navigant or Guidehouse, less typical of, the large firms like the McKinseys and Deloittes of the world. I know frequently entry-level consultants at those firms will have to travel almost full time. That being said, all this knowledge is from, pre-COVID times. So I know plenty of friends that work at those firms that have not traveled in 6 months, and it'll be interesting to see how that landscape changes, after the pandemic. And I think a lot of firms were already shifting in the direction of trying to decrease their expenses through frequent travel. But it's something you'll have to gauge and learn about from the particular team and firm that you're applying to. And then the second question was around soft skills that we're looking for. A lot of it comes down to communication. A lot of it comes down to, can you clearly articulate your way of thinking and your ideas? Can you provide good rationale for for your thought process? And, essentially, I guess I'm getting back to communication, making sure that you can communicate even, fairly complex scientific or business concepts in a way that is easily digestible and can speak to potentially multiple different audiences. I had many times where I was speaking to a room that included both the commercial lead for a particular project that was very much a marketing focused business operations person, and the scientific product lead or the research lead that was very well versed in all of the technical details and the scientific background. And whatever information you were presenting, whatever questions you were asking, kind of had to strike a perfect balance between those two worlds. So looking for individuals that have the communication skills to understand what types of information is relevant in a particular circumstance and how you can communicate that clearly that's just of the utmost importance.
Great. Thank you very much, Andrew. We really appreciate you taking time out and coming for to enlighten our students and postdocs on consulting careers.